Okay, so the plan is now to connect all the extrusions and the top cover together, and we're going to turn those into one object. You can see the outline above. These extrusions are called circle 001, and the circle is our lid, so to speak. So if we now select both objects and then press Command J, we join these things together and they become one object. You can see it in the outline above. We have a bit of geometry here that is relatively unnecessary. Ultimately, it makes little difference to our render. However, there are algorithms that can fix these small problems for you, and these are so-called cleanup algorithms. That means if I select everything here now, so all the geometry, go to Mesh and then say Clean Up, we get all sorts of options like Decimate Geometry, which decimates the geometry we don't need. As you can imagine, that's actually quite helpful here because I've created a lot of unnecessary dots in the middle all throughout the subdivision, which I didn't really think about. So if I put this here now and say that these specific points are removed, it helps a lot. So this means that the decimator will remove these points for us, and that will save us a lot of hassle. Also, it just makes the geometry a lot better and a lot cleaner, and that also helps in keeping things a bit more structured and clean, I think. We then select one of the edges again from Q, Edge Loops, and now we want to extrude this edge loop up again on the Z-axis. So we do EZ up, and then we just want to do it all over again. So EZ, extrude a bit upwards again, and we're going to make this part a little bit smaller so that we get a bit of a rough curve. Now we press the E, extrude, but don't want to move it in any direction. So basically extrude without moving. And you can see down here in the menu that the move is 0 everywhere, meaning we have now extruded, but we stayed exactly where we were, and we're going inwards, and that's what we're doing now. Okay, so we're going inside now, and we scale it all the way down to about here, probably. And then we press E and S again to scale it down a bit, GZ to move it in a bit, E again, so that we can do it down a bit, and scale with S, G, Z to move it down a bit more significantly this time, about to here. And I tend to press Alt Z to get the X-ray out because it bothers me a bit right now. Let's press E, Z again, and scale the whole thing down a bit again, and then move it down a bit again, so that we have the kind of slight curve into it. And then we press E again, and then S again to make all this smaller again, and then we're about here. Press E again, press S again, and it lands about here. Press G, press Z, and we can move the whole thing back up here. EZ, extrude up, and in addition, slight scale down, and then you see what happens. We should land at about the same level here. It doesn't matter if it's a little too high or a little too low. These slight imperfections are actually realistic too, so don't worry about that. Okay, again, before we continue, I first want to clean things up a little bit, but now we're relatively high up overall, which means I would now deselect this edge loop, and then select this edge loop, press Q again, and then actually select the entire edge loop. Then we go into the side view for a moment, let's take a look, and then we press G, Z, and then move both down at the same time so we're back where we want to be. And then we select the upper edge loop again, we press Q, we pick edge loops, and then we press E and Z again. We extrude it slightly up again, and then scale it even more clearly. Okay, again we press E, but we don't want to move it. You can see the parameters on the bottom left corner are all on 0, and this time we move it way down the middle. Hit about here, and then we press E again, we press S again, and make that a bit smaller. Then move that down a little bit. Press E again, press S again, and then we move that really far down, really in there, so to speak. And so we have the rough shape of our McDonald's cup. And we can see that we really have a rough geometry here again. And we want to bevel the whole thing to make it look better. For that, I'm going to select all these edge loops again. And then on the Q, edge loops, Shift Spacebar, Command and B, we have our bevel tool again, which we can use here again, making sure that nothing overlaps. Then we want to scroll up again, and now you can see that we have our new geometry, and the whole thing actually looks like a McDonald's cup, as opposed to a weird baby cup or something like that. Of course, I also picked out a small image for the upper part, which means we press W again for our selection tool, we go back to Q, edge loops, E to extrude, S to scale in, G, Z to move up, but not too blatantly. So then we move E again, S inwards, G, Z again, to move it up a bit, and we press E again and S again. You may have noticed right now that I press E and S most of the time on this model, only actually using the extrusion tool. And then the rest of the time I use bevel so that the whole thing looks nice and not so edgy. Very rarely the insert tool or the loop cut tool are used, but other than that, these are essentially the tools you need to model most things. In very, very, very rare cases, you also need the other tools. But with these basic tools, if you are creative and find creative solutions to everything, you're pretty much ready to go. If you then have a bit of knowledge about modifiers, then you're basically completely involved in the modeling game. Right now, however, we're only making McDonald's cups, and that's not that uncomplicated, so if you ever manage to do that, you can pat yourself on the back and say, you know what? I'm not completely illiterate in Blender. Anyway, too much talking, let's go back to the text. We now want to select our edges here again, so we press Q, edge loops, and check again that nothing overlaps. If now, for example, the left part would want to bevel a bit more than the part right here, but down here is the limit, it's of course very clear what you can do. You can just select these two separately. So we press Q, edge loops, we click the bevel tool, and then you can bevel them to the limit down there. We choose the two, then we do Q, edge loops, and we also bevel these to the limit of their own. And you can of course also do Q, edge loops on these here, and then also bevel to the limit there, and then you'll have a nicer curve in there. But it's your decision in the end, of course.